Our next method is factor by grouping. So factor by grouping is a method specifically used when our polynomial has four different terms. And it says factor a GCF out of the first two terms and then another GCF out of the last two terms. You would still try to factor out a GCF out of all four terms first, but you usually can't do that on these problems. Meaning on 17, there's no number I can take out of all four of those, and I can't take out a variable out of all four because the 8 doesn't have any variable. So if we do the factor by grouping on this one, I'm just looking at the first two terms. So again, it's the first two terms and then the last two terms separately. So I can't take out any coefficients or irregular numbers, but for x's, this one has an x squared, this one has an x. So I can take out an x. And if you take an x out of an x squared, that leaves you with an x left. If you take an x out of the 2x, then that just leaves you with a plus 2 and no x's. So then let's look at our second two terms. And I can take a 4 out of those because 4 divides in evenly into both 4 and 8. And then what's left over? Well, we took the 4 out of the 4x, so I just have an x left over. And if you divide 8 by 4, then you get plus 2. Now something very important here, you'll notice that my two binomials match. And they actually have to match for this to work. So on the previous problems, we were factoring out a binomial out of the two different terms. The binomial was the GCF. So this is actually similar to that. So the x plus 2 is what's common now to these two. So we're going to take the x plus 2 out. So whatever's in parentheses becomes our first term. And then whatever is not in parentheses, meaning the x and the plus 4, those will combine to become our second one. So we're factoring an x plus 2 out, and that leaves us with an x plus 4. For 18, the first two terms, I can take an x out, and that will leave me with just an x from the x squared. And if you take an x out of 3x, you get just a plus 3 that's left over. My second two terms, I can't take out any variables, but I can take out a minus 5. And that will leave me just with an x in the first term, and then negative 15 divided by negative 5 is a positive 3 in the second term. So you'll notice that we have an x plus 3 and an x plus 3. Those have to match in order for you to complete the factor by grouping. And they do. So I can just write that x plus 3 once, and then whatever's outside the parentheses, meaning the x and the minus 5, those will combine to be your second factor. And that'll be your final answer.